Hi everyone, my name is Alicia Salcido. Welcome to my Week 5 multimedia discussion for Public Sector Change for MPA 594. For this scenario, the County of Riverside Department of Public Social Services hired a new department head because the department is planning to implement a new system in which will require DPSS to standardize caseload processing immediately. How will the change happen? So in order for the change to happen, the new department head will use Luther Gulick's PAWS Corp as the overarching theory to implement the change by primarily focusing on planning, organizing, staffing, directing, coordinating, and reporting. So for our first thing, we have planning and organizing. For the planning, this is a primary function that's needed, as Luther Gulick would also implement in his PAWS Corp, that in order for managers to even be functional in the organization, they need to first implement planning, as this is going to structure the change to be happening in itself. Weber would also agree that this is very important to have in a way to change, because for a manager to be functional, he also believes that we need to have these different types of hierarchy of management structure in the division of labor, formal selection process. So we need to incorporate these elements as well in the planning phase. For Fayol, he's also agreeing that for a manager to be functional, there's 5 different components that a manager needs in order to create the structure, which is the planning, organizing, commanding, coordinating, controlling. And this is going to help implement the planning phase. For the organization, we want to primarily focus on the concept of efficiency. And this is how we're going to relate back to Taylor, using that scientific management, finding what is the best way through the different types of division of labor. And also looking at what is a manager doing to ensure that they're selecting the correct employees to meet those special job specifications, as we're going to be focusing on a new set of processes, which is going to require workers to either reduce their role or increase their role, and finding what works for what phase of the planning. Merton could also relate to the efficiency, because as an organization, you tend to just to work and do things because it's been like the bureaucratic process. We've always implemented these rules and regulations, and no one's ever decided to figure out why are we doing this. And in Merton, he's actually going to be helping to develop that, this change is actually needed for the organization. We need to find better ways to implement those processes. Simon is also going to help us in that decision-making process, because Simon's going to be using his bounded rationality. Since the organization itself, they're going to try to find ways that are, that's going to be maybe not the best one, not the one best way, but finding a way that's satisfying, the bounded rationality way, just doing what's actually working at that moment. And then we could also add Lindblom into this, because as Lindblom would agree that when you're changing through policies and that policy process, it doesn't happen overnight. That process is going to take time to evaluate and have a slowly change. It's not going to revolutionize, it's going to evolve over time for that. And then we can also bring in Riddle and Weber into this for the wicked problems, because even if we are implementing a change, we're not even sure, or Riddle and Weber would agree that you can't agree that the solutions that we find right now are going to be beneficial in the future. There could still be problems that are always reoccurring, especially when policy is always changing. You can't always have a solution for everything right away. For staffing and directing, we want to focus on employee engagement, because employee engagement is going to allow us to change this process within DPSS by ensuring that the employees are satisfied and they are motivated through the change. We want to focus on Follett first, because Follett has this idea of unity. We want to make sure that we're incorporating everyone's ideas, feelings, and understanding into this process. She understands that you can't have the negative aspects not included, because then you're not going to have a well-rounded understanding of everyone on this process. Then we can go to Maslow, because Maslow is talking about how to actually motivate employees. And the different ways to motivate employees is by their needs. You have to satisfy these needs. So as long as the organization is able to handle that process, this is one sufficient way to satisfy their needs. And then we can look at McGregor. We can look at the theory X and theory Y. And this is very important because it's not only focusing on the type of employee, but the manager in itself, because the manager is going to have a big input on the way that the employee is working just based on their rationality of the employee. So for theory X, we could have a manager who's very pessimistic about the way the employee works and, their motivations and their goals. In comparison to theory Y, where the manager is very optimistic, they're very supportive, collaborative with that employee. So those are also going to be having an effect on that type of employee engagement. For the directing process, we want to focus more on the type of leadership skill or style that's required in directing. In the process of that, for this would be a democratic leadership. And the reason why it would be democratic, it's just because a democratic leadership, it's going to consist more of a supportive, collaborative conjunction where, the democratic leader is going to be very open to what other people's opinions are, which is very important because when you're doing this process and change, you can't just have a one-sided opinion. You need to have open opinions from everyone and voices to help with this change of process. And these are the traits within the democratic leadership, which would be like collaborative, supportive, and participative. And how is this type of leadership, how is it handling the change? Well, this can be discussed through path goal theory, as path goal theory primarily is focusing on the behavior, is contingent to the satisfaction of motivation and performance of their employees. So this democratic leadership is helping the way to enforce this change. For our last theme, we have coordination and reporting. So for coordination, we want to focus primarily on communication. And for that, it's because when you're in the process of doing a change, you have to have this open line of communication to make sure that the change is actually going effectively. Barnard would agree that you want to encourage your employees to have this communication because we're all doing this together. He wants to make sure that communication is very important because that's how an organization is functional. Follett would agree that communication is important because you need to have reciprocal relationships between managers and employees, to have an open line communications, to have an understanding of what is going on, to hear the pros and cons of the change. Katz and Cons for their open system theory would relate more to the communications because you want to make sure that you're getting all these different inputs to ensure that this output is effective for the change. Next, for the reporting, we want to focus on accountability. As public administrators, you have to make sure that you are accountable for all the actions that's being taken and being very transparent for the public servants that you're serving. Wilson would agree this was going to relate back to his dichotomy because as a public administrator, you have to make sure that you're implementing all the rules and regulations that were placed. That's how you're going to be accountable in this aspects. For Allison, he's also agreeing that even though private and public organizations are similar, the biggest difference in that aspect is going to be the transparency. Because as public administrators, you have to be very transparent to be accountable for your actions. You have to make sure that you're doing everything lawfully, and you have to show everything to the public, whatever actions you're taking. So in conclusion, in order for the new department head to have this change effective within DPSS to standardize caseless processing, they need to incorporate Luther Gulick's POSCOR by primarily focusing on the planning, organizing, staffing, directing, coordinating, and reporting. And thank you guys very much for listening. I hope you guys have a great week.